3 hours before I was supposed to become a wife, my phone buzzed with a screenshot that made my hands shake so hard I dropped my bouquet on the hotel carpet. It was from my cousin Renee, and it showed a message my brother had just sent to all 47 people in our family group chat. Skipping it. She is marrying a broke loser. Do not waste your gas. That was it. One sentence. One sentence that emptied my wedding. My name is Sutton Mercer, and I was 34 years old that Saturday morning in June of 2025, standing in a bridal suite at the Linden Oaks Hotel in Charlotte, North Carolina, with mascara running down my face and a hairstylist trying to fix curls that I was sweating right out of. I had spent 14 months planning that day. I had paid for most of it myself, $26,000 saved from my salary as a pediatric nurse, plus another $9,000 that my fiancé Caleb had quietly added when he saw me crying over the catering deposit. I had picked every flower. I had written my own vows. I had begged my mother to come dress shopping with me, and when she said she was busy, I had gone alone and bought a gown off the clearance rack because the real ones cost more than my rent. And now my brother had blown it all up with 12 words. I should tell you about my brother before I tell you what happened next, because you cannot understand the size of the betrayal until you understand the shape of him. His name is Bryce Mercer. He is 2 years older than me, and from the time we were children, he was the prince of the house. My father, Wendell Mercer, worked 31 years as a regional sales manager for a paper supply company, and he believed sons carried the family name and daughters borrowed it until a husband took them off the books. That is a direct quote. He said it at Thanksgiving when I was 19. My mother, Darlene, did not disagree. She just refilled the gravy boat. Bryce was the son who could do no wrong. When he flunked out of his first semester at North Carolina State, my father called it a learning experience. When I graduated nursing school with honors, my father asked if I was sure I did not want to try for medical school like a real doctor. When Bryce totaled the car my parents bought him at 16, they bought him a newer one. When my used Honda broke down in college, my father told me it was time I learned what bills felt like. By 2025, Bryce was 36 and worked in middle management at a fintech company in uptown Charlotte called Aramark Capital. He made decent money, somewhere around $140,000 a year, and he never let anyone forget it. He wore the watch. He drove the leased BMW. He posted pictures of himself at rooftop bars on a Tuesday, and whenever the family gathered, he steered every conversation back to himself, his promotions, his bonuses, his future, while my parents nodded like he was reading scripture. I met Caleb Whitfield in October of 2022 at a coffee shop on East Boulevard. He was sitting in the corner reading a book about agricultural economics, which I thought was the most boring possible thing a man could read on a Sunday morning, so naturally I asked him about it. He looked up, and I will be honest with you, my first thought was that his eyes looked tired in a way that did not match his age. He was 36 then, 2 years older than me, and he had the kind of quiet that you only get from carrying something heavy for a long time. He told me he was reading because he was working on a problem. I asked what kind of problem. He smiled and said, the kind that does not have a clean answer yet. That was our first conversation. We went on our first real date a week later. He took me to a small Vietnamese place in a strip mall, the kind of place with plastic chairs and the best food you have ever had in your life, and we talked for 4 hours. He asked me about nursing. He asked me about my parents. He asked what I wanted my life to look like when I was 60. Nobody had ever asked me that before. Not my father, not my brother, not any of the men I had dated through my 20s who were all variations of the same disappointing theme. Caleb did not talk about his job much. He told me he worked in technology, that he had started a company a few years back, that things were going well enough to pay the bills. I did not push. I had dated men who would not shut up about their careers, and his quietness felt like a relief, not a red flag. We moved slowly. He met my parents in the spring of 2023, and the visit went exactly the way I had been dreading it would. My father shook his hand and asked what he did. Caleb said he worked in software. My father asked what company. Caleb said one I had not heard of. My father said, "Never heard of it." And then he turned to me and asked when I was going to bring home someone with a real career. Right in front of Caleb. My mother laughed like it was a joke. Bryce, who had stopped by specifically to size him up, looked at Caleb, looked at his shoes, which were nice but not flashy, looked at his watch, which was just a regular watch, and gave me a smile that I had been seeing my whole life. The smile that said, "Oh, honey, you have settled again." Caleb did not flinch. He shook my father's hand. He complimented my mother on the cornbread, and on the way home he held my hand at a red light and said, "Your family is going to need time." He never asked me to defend him. He never made me choose. He just kept showing up. He came to Easter and made small talk with my aunts. He came to my father's birthday and brought a bottle of bourbon that I picked out because Caleb does not drink. He sat through Bryce making jokes about agricultural economics for 2 hours and laughed at the ones that were actually funny. He proposed in April of 2024 on the back porch of a cabin we rented in Boone for my 33rd birthday. No big production. He got down on one knee while I was holding a mug of bad gas station coffee, and he said, "Sutton, I do not need a single other thing in my life if I can have you in it. Will you marry me?" I said yes before he finished the question. The ring was simple, a single stone in a thin band, and I loved it more than anything I had ever owned. When I told my parents, my mother asked how big the ring was. When I told my brother, he asked how much Caleb made. I said it was not his business. Bryce laughed and said, "That means not much." And then he said something I will never forget. He said, "Sutton, you are 33 years old and you are panicking. Do not lock yourself into the first man who tolerates you." I should have cut him off right there. I should have walked away from that conversation and never invited him to anything again. But I did what I always did. I swallowed it. I told myself he would come around. I told myself that when he saw how good Caleb was to me, when he saw the life we were building, he would finally be happy for me. I am a 34-year-old woman with a college degree and a nursing license, and I still wanted my big brother to be proud of me. That is the embarrassing truth. So I sent him an invitation, a nice one on thick cream paper, with his name written in calligraphy. He texted back, "We'll be there." 2 words. No congratulations. No can I help. Just, "We'll be there." And now, 3 hours before the ceremony, with my dress hanging on the back of the door and my bouquet on the floor and my cousin Renee on the phone asking what she should do, I realized that he had been planning this. Not the showing up. The not showing up. The text. The 47 relatives. The empty pews. He had wanted to humiliate me on the most important day of my life, and he had executed it like a project at work. I sat down on the edge of the bed in my white robe, and I looked at the screenshot one more time. Broke loser. That is what he called the man I loved. Broke loser. I did not know yet what Caleb actually did for a living. I did not know yet about the black SUV that would pull up in 3 hours and change everything. I just knew that my hands were shaking, and my mascara was ruined, and somewhere across town my brother was probably eating brunch and laughing. Then my phone rang. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. I let it go again. The 3rd time, I picked up. My mother was crying when I answered the phone, and at first I thought it was because she was on her way and stuck in traffic, or because she had heard what Bryce had done and was outraged on my behalf. I was wrong on both counts. She was crying because she did not know what to do, and what she meant by that, as she explained through small sniffling breaths, was that Bryce had called her that morning at 6 and told her things about Caleb that had her, in her words, sick to her stomach. I asked her what things. She hesitated. I asked again. She said Bryce had told her that Caleb was being investigated for fraud at his company, that he had lost his house in 2023, that the ring on my finger was rented, that the honeymoon to Maui was charged to a credit card he had no intention of paying, that Caleb had been married before and had a child he did not pay support for. I sat on the edge of that bed and listened to my mother list invention after invention, and the worst part was not that she believed it. The worst part was how relieved she sounded that she finally had a reason to feel the way she had felt about him from the beginning. I told her none of that was true. I told her that Caleb owned his house, a 3-bedroom on a quiet street near Plaza Midwood, and that I had been living there with him for 14 months. I told her the ring was bought, not rented, and that I had been with him when he picked it up from the jeweler. I told her there was no ex-wife and no child, and that whatever Bryce had said, he had made up. My mother said, "Sutton, why would your brother lie about something like this?" I said, "Mom, why would I?" She did not answer. That silence told me everything I needed to know about the next 40 years of my relationship with her, if I let it stay the way it was. Then she said the line that ended the call. She said, "Your father is not coming." I asked her to repeat that. She said, "Your father is not coming to the wedding. He is too upset. He says he cannot watch his daughter make this mistake in front of God." I said, "Mom, are you coming?" She paused. She said, "I do not know yet." I hung up. I did not cry. I had been crying for an hour already, and I had run out. I just stood up, walked into the bathroom, washed my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red, my cheeks were blotchy, and my hair was still pinned up in those curls the stylist had worked on for 2 hours. I looked for 1 second like a stranger. Then I looked like myself again, and I made a decision. I was getting married that day. I was getting married to Caleb Whitfield at 4 in the afternoon at the Linden Oaks Hotel, in front of whoever showed up, whether it was 2 people or 200. And I was not going to let my brother win. I picked up the phone and called Caleb. He answered on the first ring. I told him what Bryce had texted. I read it to him word for word. There was a long silence on the other end. Then he said, "Are you okay?" Not, "What should we do?" Not, "I am furious." Not, "I am going to handle this." Just, "Are you okay?" I told him I was. He said, "Do you still want to do this today?" I said yes. He said, "Okay, then we are doing it today, and I love you, and I will see you at 4. That is the man my brother called a broke loser. I sat back down on the bed and I tried to think of who was actually coming. My maid of honor was my best friend from nursing school, Priya Anand, who was already in the room next door doing her own makeup. Priya was 34, sharp as a knife, the kind of friend who would help you hide a body, and then ask why you needed help in the first place. She had been my person for 12 years. She was coming. My grandmother on my mother's side, Lorraine, who was 81 and used a walker and lived in an assisted living facility in Greensboro, had told me 3 months ago that she would not miss it for anything. She was coming, because she had stopped listening to her son-in-law and her grandson sometime around 2015, and now did exactly what she wanted. My Aunt Marcine, my mother's younger sister, who had divorced a man like my father and never looked back, was coming. She had 3 kids, all in their 20s, and 2 of them, my cousins Renee and Tomas, had said they would be there too. That was 4 from her side. From Caleb's side, his mother Joan, his sister Hadley, and his sister of the husband Owen were flying in from Oregon. 3, plus a small handful of his friends from work, 3 or 4 of them, who I had met at dinners and liked very much, though I did not know much about what they actually did. Let us call that 4. Add Priya and her husband Vikram. That made me 12 at the absolute most, if no one else bailed. 12 guests for a wedding that was supposed to have 120. I had paid for 120 plates of food. I had paid for a band. I had paid for a photographer for 8 hours and a videographer for 6 and a florist who had spent the morning arranging white and pale pink peonies down the aisle of a room that was now going to be mostly empty. I sat there doing the math in my head, calculating how much each of those empty chairs was going to cost me. And then I stopped, because I realized that was the exact thing Bryce would want me to be doing. So instead, I picked up the phone and called the wedding coordinator, a woman named Estella, and I told her what had happened. I told her about the text. I told her about the 47 cancellations. I told her my father was not coming and my mother was a question mark. Estella did not even pause. She said, "Sweetheart, I have done 600 weddings. I have seen worse. You are getting married today, and it is going to be beautiful. Leave the chairs to me." 20 minutes later, she texted me a picture. The ballroom had been transformed. She had pulled half the chairs out. She had pushed the remaining ones into a tighter, more intimate arrangement near the front. She had moved the floral arrangements to fill the empty spaces along the walls. The room no longer looked like a wedding waiting for guests who never came. It looked like a wedding for the people who mattered. I almost cried again, but this time it would have been for a different reason. Priya came in. She took one look at me, took my hand, and said, "Tell me what you need." I said, "I need you to do my makeup again because I ruined it." She sat me down at the vanity and got to work. While she did, I told her everything. The text, the cancellations, my mother, my father. Priya did not interrupt. When I was done, she said one thing. She said, "Sutton, has Caleb ever told you exactly what his company does?" I said, "Software. He works in software." Priya stopped, mascara wand halfway to my eye. She said, "Sutton, have you ever looked up the company name?" I said, "His company is called Whitfield Holdings," and I assumed it was a small thing he ran with a few people from his apartment. Priya put down the mascara. She looked at me in the mirror with the strangest expression I have ever seen on her face. She said, "Honey, we need to talk." But before she could say what she was going to say, there was a knock at the door. It was my grandmother Lorraine, 90 minutes early, her walker thumping against the carpet, with my Aunt Marcine right behind her carrying her purse. My grandmother walked into that bridal suite, looked at me in my robe and my half-done makeup and said, "Where is that brother of yours? I have something to say to him." I told her he was not coming. She said, "Good, that saves me a trip. Sit down, sweetheart. We have things to talk about." My grandmother Lorraine had a way of taking over a room without raising her voice. She lowered herself into the upholstered chair by the window, set her cane against the wall, accepted a glass of water from Priya with a small nod, and then she looked at me with those clear gray eyes that had not missed anything in 81 years. She said, "Sutton, sit down across from me." I sat. She said, "Your aunt told me on the drive over what your brother did this morning. Is it true?" I told her yes. I showed her the screenshot. She read it twice, slowly, then handed the phone back to me. She did not gasp. She did not say bless his heart. She just sighed the way someone sighs when something they have suspected for a long time turns out to be exactly what they suspected. She said, "I want to tell you something and I want you to listen to me. Your brother has been jealous of you since the day you came home from the hospital. He was 2 years old, and he watched the entire family hand their attention to a little baby, and he never recovered from it. Your father did not help. Your father compensated by giving him everything and you nothing. And your brother learned that the only way to feel important was to make you feel small. I have watched it happen for 34 years, and I have not said anything because it was not my place. But today it is my place, because today is your day, and I am not going to let you walk down that aisle thinking the problem is you." I stared at her. My Aunt Marcine, standing behind her, nodded slowly. Priya, holding the mascara wand, had stopped moving entirely. My grandmother went on. She said, "Your fiancé. Have you talked to him about what Bryce did?" I told her I had. I told her Caleb had asked if I was okay and said the wedding was still happening. She nodded. She said, "That is the right answer from a good man." Then she said something that made me sit up straighter. She said, "Sutton, do you know who Caleb works for?" I said, "He runs a company. Whitfield Holdings. Something with software." My grandmother and my aunt exchanged a look. Marcine stepped forward and said, "Sweetheart, when you brought Caleb to Thanksgiving in 2023, I overheard him on the back porch on a phone call. He stepped outside to take it because it was a work thing. I was out there having a cigarette, which I should not have been because I quit, but I was. He did not see me. He was talking to someone he called Raina, and he was telling her to push the Series C announcement to the second quarter because the team needed more time. He was talking like the person in charge. Not like an employee, like the person in charge. I blinked. I said, Series C is a funding round. Priya said, yes, it is. And please tell me you have looked up Whitfield Holdings since 2022. I had not. I want you to understand this, because I know it sounds impossible. I had been with Caleb for over 2 years. I had moved into his house. I had agreed to marry him, and I had never once typed his company name into a search bar. The reason is simple, and it is not because I was stupid. It is because Caleb had a way of talking about his work that made it sound like a normal job. He would say, I have a long day tomorrow. The team is shipping something. He would say, my boss is going to be a pain about this. He had a boss. He had coworkers. He went to an office. He did not drive a flashy car. He drove a 4-year-old Toyota. He did not wear expensive watches. He paid for things, but never in a way that felt loud. He once told me he had grown up poor in Eastern Oregon, the son of a single mother who worked at a feed store, and that he never wanted to be the kind of man who measured himself by his stuff. I had taken him at his word. But also, and this is the part I am most ashamed of, I had been so used to my father and my brother measuring every man by his bank account that I had decided early on to never do it. I had decided to love Caleb for who he was, and I had refused to investigate the rest. I thought I was being noble. I was actually just being incurious. Priya reached over, picked up my phone from the vanity, and typed Whitfield Holdings into it. Then she handed it back to me. I want to describe what I saw on that screen, because I have replayed it in my head probably 400 times since that day. The first result was a Wikipedia page. The second was a Forbes article from January of 2025. The third was a Bloomberg piece. The fourth was a CNBC clip. The header image on the Wikipedia page was a photograph of Caleb in a charcoal sweater, the same charcoal sweater I had folded out of the dryer the previous Tuesday, sitting in front of a glass wall with the words Whitfield Holdings on it in clean white letters. The first line of the Wikipedia entry read, Whitfield Holdings is an American agricultural technology company headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina, founded in 2017 by Caleb Whitfield, who currently serves as Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board. The Forbes article was titled, The Quiet Billion-Dollar Company You Have Never Heard of. I read it 3 times. Whitfield Holdings made software that helped large-scale farming operations manage water usage, soil chemistry, and supply chain logistics. They had clients in 22 states and 4 countries. They had raised a Series B in 2023 at a valuation of $420 million. They were rumored to be closing a Series C any day now at a valuation north of $1.5 billion. The article called Caleb a, quote, deeply private founder who declines almost all media requests and is described by colleagues as the most low-key chief executive in the Southeast, end quote. I put the phone down. I looked at my grandmother. I looked at my aunt. I looked at Priya. I said, oh my God. My grandmother said, language, but smiled. Priya said, Sutton, the man you are marrying in 3 hours runs a company worth almost $2 billion and you did not know. I said, he never told me. My Aunt Marcine said, sweetheart, you never asked, and he loved you for that. I sat there trying to absorb it. The Toyota, the plain wedding ring. The way he split the bill the first 6 times we went out, even though I now realized he could have paid for our entire neighborhood. The way he had never, not once, used his money to impress me or to win me. He had wanted to be loved as a man, not as a wallet, and I had loved him as a man, because I had never known he was anything else. Then a different thought hit me, and it hit me hard. I said, oh my God, Bryce works at Aeromark Capital. My Aunt Marcine said, Yes, I said. Aramark Capital is a venture firm, Priya, who actually paid attention to business news, said. Sutton. Aramark is one of the lead investors in the Series C round of Whitfield Holdings. I read about it last week. They are putting in something like $200 million. The deal is closing this month. The room went very quiet. My brother who had been mocking my fiancé for 2 years. My brother who had called him a broke loser this morning. My brother who had bragged at every family dinner about the big deal his firm was working on with some agricultural tech company. My brother had been working, for months, on the deal to fund the company that my fiancé owned and ran. And he had no idea. I started to laugh. I could not help it. It started small, and then it got bigger. And then my grandmother was laughing too. And Marcine was laughing, and Priya was wiping tears from her eyes, and the 4 of us in that bridal suite were howling like we had lost our minds. When I finally got my breath back, my grandmother wiped her eyes and said, "Sutton, honey, does Caleb know who your brother works for?" I said. "I told him a long time ago." "He has always known," Marcine said. "Then he has known for a long time exactly who Bryce is." I said yes. He has been sitting at our family dinners for 2 years, listening to my brother brag about a deal he was apparently doing with himself, and he has never said a word, Priya said. "That is either the most patient man on the planet or the most strategic." I said, "I think he is both." Then my phone buzzed. It was Caleb. He had sent one text. It said, "I am on my way to the venue." Something I should have told you a long time ago. I will explain everything tonight. I love you. P.S. My CEO is coming. Long story. I stared at the text. My CEO. He did not have a CEO. He was the CEO. He was the CEO. What he meant, I would find out in less than 2 hours, was something else entirely. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock, and at 2:30 I was finally in my dress. Priya had laced the back of it with hands that were somehow steadier than mine. The dress was ivory satin, sleeveless, with a small train, and the moment it was on, I felt something I had not expected to feel that day. I felt calm. It was not the calm of denial. It was the calm of someone who had finally figured out the rules of the game she was playing. For 34 years I had been playing a game where my brother set the score, my father kept the record, my mother kept the peace. And I tried to play well enough to be loved. That morning my brother had ended that game. He did not know it, but he had. Because the second he sent that text, he had set the score so low that I could no longer pretend the score meant anything. My grandmother and aunt had gone downstairs to make sure the ballroom looked the way Estella had promised. Priya was with me. She handed me my bouquet, the same one I had dropped that morning. The peonies a little bruised but still beautiful. She said, "You look like a woman who is about to take her life back." I said, "I feel like one." At 2:45, my phone buzzed again. It was my mother. I almost did not pick up, but I did, because some part of me still wanted to give her one last chance. She said, "Sutton, I am in the car. I am coming. Your father is not." I told him I was going, and he said if I went he would not speak to me for a month, and I said, "Good, that will be a quiet month. Are you okay? Tell me what you need." I almost dropped the phone. I told her I needed her there, and that was all. She said she was 20 minutes out. I told her to drive safe. Then I hung up, sat down on the edge of the bed in my wedding dress, and I cried for the 3rd time that day, but this time they were good tears, the kind that wash something out of you instead of breaking something inside you. Priya handed me a tissue and told me to tilt my head back so the makeup would not run. She said, "Your mother just chose you. That has not happened before, has it?" I said, "No, not like that." She said, "Then today is already a miracle, and the ceremony has not even started." At 3 o'clock, my cousin Renee arrived with her husband and her 2 kids, plus her brother Thomas, who had driven up from Columbia, South Carolina, even though Bryce had been texting him all morning telling him not to bother. Renee had been the one who screenshotted Bryce's text to me in the first place. And when she walked into the bridal suite, she hugged me so hard I felt the boning in my dress press into my ribs. She said, "I am so sorry about my uncle and your brother." I told her she had nothing to be sorry for. She was the reason I knew at all. By 3:15, more people were arriving than I had expected. Estella came up to the suite with a clipboard and a tight smile and said, "Sweetheart, I need to update your guest count." "Some folks showed up after all," I said. "How many?" she said. 22 so far, and we still have 45 minutes. I asked who. She read the list. Marcine kids, my grandmother, my mother apparently, Caleb mother and sister and brother-in-law, 6 of Caleb work friends, Priya and Vikram, 2 of my nursing school friends, my cousin Renee family, Tomas, and 3 of my aunts and uncles from my mother's side who had ignored Bryce's text entirely. My great-aunt Phyllis, 87 years old, had driven herself from Asheville. She had called me an hour earlier and said, "Your brother does not run this family. Sweetheart, I am coming." 22. I had been bracing for 12. 22 felt like a miracle. At 3:30, my mother walked into the suite. She had been crying. Her eye makeup was gone. She was wearing the navy dress we had picked out together in February. She stood in the doorway and she looked at me in my wedding gown, and she did something my mother had not done in many years. She covered her mouth with both hands and her shoulders shook, and she said, "Oh, Sutton. Oh, Sutton. You are so beautiful. I am so sorry. I am so sorry I almost was not here." I crossed the room and I hugged her. I felt her shaking. I told her she was here now, and that was what mattered. She held me at arm length and said, "I have something to tell you. Your father said some things this morning, and I am going to deal with those things later. But I need you to know that I do not believe what your brother said, and I do not believe what your father said, and I am here. And that man you are about to marry is the kindest person who has ever sat at my table, and I see that now, and I am sorry it took me until today." I told her I forgave her. I told her there was nothing to forgive. I told her to fix her mascara because we had a wedding to get to. She laughed, the first real laugh I had heard from her in months, and she sat down at the vanity and Priya handed her a tube of concealer. While my mother fixed her face, she told me what my father had said that morning. He had called me, in her words, desperate. He had said I was marrying Caleb because I was scared no one else would have me. He had said that any woman who could not bring a real man to the family by 34 had something wrong with her. He had said that Bryce's text had finally given the family permission to stop pretending. My mother said that something in her had broken when he said that. Not in a sad way, in a sharp, clean way. Like a piece of glass she had been carrying for 40 years had finally fallen and shattered, and she could finally see what was on the other side of it. She said, "I have been afraid of your father for a very long time, Sutton. I do not think I will be afraid of him anymore." I held her hand. I did not say anything. Some moments deserve silence. At 3:45, Estella knocked on the door. She said, "Brides, I have an update on the guest count." I asked how many we were at. She said, 38. I said, "What?" She said, "More people are walking in. I think word got around that the original text was a lie. Your grandmother has been on her phone for 2 hours, she said, and I do not know what she has been saying to people, but you have got real cousins and a couple of family friends, and even a former co-worker of yours coming up the front steps as we speak." My grandmother, who had quietly returned to the suite without anyone noticing, looked up from her phone and said, "I called everyone I had a number for. I told them exactly what your brother did. I told them what kind of man Caleb is. And I told them if they did not show up for my granddaughter, they could lose my number permanently." People showed up. I started laughing. My mother started laughing. Priya started laughing. We were a room full of women in fancy clothes laughing at a small, fierce woman with a cane. My grandmother looked at me and said, Sutton, you are about to walk down that aisle, and I want you to remember something. The people in those chairs chose you. Every single one of them chose to be there, knowing exactly what your brother said. That is a wedding you can be proud of. Some brides have 200 guests who show up because it is on the calendar. You have however many you have, and every single one of them is there on purpose. I told her I loved her. She said, I know, sweetheart. Now let us go get you married. At 3:55, I was standing in the small holding room just outside the ballroom doors, with my mother on one side of me and my grandmother on the other side, and Priya behind me holding the train of my dress off the carpet. I had asked my mother that morning, when she finally arrived, if she would walk me down the aisle with my grandmother. My father had been supposed to do it. Now my father was at home, and the two strongest women I knew were taking his place. My grandmother said she was going to walk me as far as her knees would let her, and then she was going to sit down in the front row and watch me finish the walk on my own, because every woman should finish her wedding aisle on her own feet. That is what she said. I have not stopped thinking about it. At 3:57, Estella came in. She said, We are ready when you are. I asked how many guests we had. She smiled a small private smile and said, 51. 51. From 12. From my brother list of bailers. 51 people had walked into that ballroom anyway, most of them in the last 20 minutes. She opened the door. The music started. It was a string quartet playing a piece Caleb and I had picked out together one Sunday afternoon, an instrumental version of a song that had played in the coffee shop the day we met. I had told Caleb that detail once, just in passing, and he had remembered it. I walked. I want to tell you what that room looked like, because I will remember it until the day I die. The ballroom had tall windows on the west side that let in the late afternoon light, gold and warm. Estella had pulled the chairs into a tight horseshoe around the aisle, so that everyone was close, and the empty chairs at the back had been replaced with arrangements of peonies and trailing greenery that made the whole space look intentional, like it was designed to be exactly this size. My great-aunt Phyllis was in the third row, dabbing her eyes. Renee and her kids were in the second row. My grandmother let go of my arm at the start of the aisle and walked, very slowly, with my Aunt Marcine on her elbow, to her seat in the front. My mother held my arm a little tighter. She whispered, You are doing it. I am so proud of you. I looked up. At the end of the aisle, under an arch of white and pink flowers, Caleb was waiting for me. He was wearing a charcoal suit, a simple white shirt, no tie. His hair was a little messy because his hair was always a little messy. He was holding his hands in front of him and trying very hard not to cry. And failing. When he saw me, he made a small sound, like the breath had been knocked out of him, and he covered his mouth with one hand for a second, and then dropped it. To his right was the officiant, a woman named Inez who I had found online and met twice for coffee. To his left, standing in the place where a best man would stand, was a man I had never seen before. He looked about 60, tall, silver hair, a dark suit that fit like it had been made for him because it probably had. He stood with his hands folded in front of him, and when I caught his eye as I came down the aisle, he gave me a small nod that managed to be both formal and warm at the same time. I did not know who he was, but Caleb had texted me, my CEO is coming, and I now understood what he had meant. This was not the CEO of the company Caleb worked for, because Caleb was the CEO of the company Caleb worked for. This was someone else, someone who Caleb apparently answered to in some other way I did not yet understand. I reached the front. My mother lifted my veil, kissed my forehead, and said, I love you. Then she stepped to her seat in the front row, next to my grandmother, who already had a handkerchief out. Caleb took my hands. His were warm, and they were shaking a little. He said, very quietly, just for me, you are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. I said, you have some explaining to do. He laughed. He actually laughed in front of everyone, with tears on his cheeks. He said, I know. After. I promise. Inez began the ceremony. I am not going to walk you through every line, because the truth is I do not remember every line. I remember pieces. I remember Inez saying that love is a choice we make every day, not a feeling that visits us. I remember Caleb's voice cracking when he said the words, "I take you." I remember my own voice surprising me with its steadiness when I said them back. I remember the moment Caleb slipped the ring onto my finger, a thin gold band with no stones because we had wanted the band itself to be simple, and how he held my hand for a second longer than he needed to. I remember the kiss. Soft, sure, not for the audience, just for us. And I remember, at the moment Inez announced us as husband and wife, the back doors of the ballroom opening one more time. It was not a guest. Estella was standing there with a look on her face I had not seen before. She caught Caleb's eye, then the eye of the silver-haired man standing next to him, and she gave them both the tiniest nod. The silver-haired man stepped forward, gently, and said, in a low voice that did not interrupt the moment, just colored it, "Caleb, they are here." Outside, Caleb squeezed my hand. He said, "Sutton, will you walk out with me for a minute? There is something I need to do." I did not understand, but I trusted him completely. I said yes. We turned and walked back down the aisle together as husband and wife. The string quartet, which had been about to start the recessional music, paused, then began it anyway when they saw us moving. The guests stood up. They clapped. My grandmother put her fingers in her mouth and whistled, which I did not even know she could do. We walked through the back doors. Estella led us through the lobby and toward the wide glass doors at the front of the hotel. The silver-haired man walked behind us, his hands clasped behind his back, calm as a Sunday morning. Through the front doors, I could see the circular drive. A black SUV was parked right in front. Two more were pulling up behind it. I saw a driver step out of the first one and open the back door, and 3 people in suits emerged, 2 men and a woman, all of them carrying leather portfolios. The woman was the one I focused on, because she was the one who looked up and locked eyes with Caleb through the glass and gave him the kind of nod that means we are ready. And then, because life is sometimes too strange to write down without it sounding fake, a 4th person stepped out of the second SUV. A man in his late 30s in a navy suit, with a tan that suggested someone who spent his weekends on a boat. He was on his phone, talking quickly, and he was clearly furious about something. It was my brother. It was Bryce. I stopped walking. I grabbed Caleb's arm. I said, "What is happening?" The silver-haired man stepped up next to us. He looked at me with kind eyes and said, "Mrs. Whitfield, my name is Holt Devereaux. I am the chairman of the board of Whitfield Holdings. I am very sorry to interrupt your wedding day. We would not be here if it were not essential. There is a board matter that has to be concluded today, and it has to be concluded in the next hour, and I am afraid your brother is the reason." I looked at Caleb. He took my hand. He said, "Sutton, the board is here to fire Bryce from the deal, and from his job, and I need to be the one to walk in there with them. I am sorry. I would not do this today if there were any other way. He has crossed a line he cannot come back from, and not because of what he did to me. Because of what he did to you. I want to back up for a second, because what happened in the next hour will not make sense unless I tell you what Holt Devereaux explained to me in the lobby of the Linden Oaks Hotel, while my brother stood 30 feet away on the phone, unaware that we were standing inside watching him through the glass. Holt was 63 years old. He had been the chief financial officer of a major agricultural conglomerate for 20 years before he retired in 2019, and he had joined the board of Whitfield Holdings in 2021 because, in his words, Caleb was the most decent young chief executive he had ever met, and he wanted to spend his retirement helping decent people. He was not just the chairman of the board. He was Caleb's mentor, and over the last 4 years he had become something close to a father to him, which was important context, because Caleb's own father had walked out when Caleb was 11. Holt spoke quietly and quickly. He told me that Whitfield Holdings was in the final stages of closing a Series C funding, round at a valuation of $1.5 billion. The lead investor was Aramark Capital. The deal had been in due diligence since November of 2024. It was supposed to close on Monday, June 9th, 2025. 2 days from our wedding. Bryce had been one of 3 associates at Aramark assigned to the deal. He was not the lead partner. He was a mid-level associate who handled some of the financial modeling and due diligence document review. He had been on email chains, he had been in some of the meetings, and he had bragged to his coworkers and to his family for months about the big agricultural tech deal he was, in his words, running. The problem was Bryce had no idea Caleb was Caleb. The deal had been managed on the Whitfield side by the chief operating officer, a woman named Raina Cho, who was the public face for most of the negotiations because Caleb hated meetings and Raina loved them. Caleb had been on a few calls, but he used his middle name in business contexts, James Caleb Whitfield, professionally J. Whitfield. Most of his employees called him J. Most of the press called him J. In the Forbes article I had read that morning, his name had been listed as J.C. Whitfield. Caleb at home, J at work. The kind of small separation that a deeply private person uses to keep his life livable. So when Bryce had met Caleb at family dinners and called him by his first name, he had never connected the friendly software guy his sister was dating with the founder of the company he was working on. He had been told the founder of Whitfield Holdings was a low-profile chief executive named Jay who refused to do press. He had never bothered to look up a picture. Why would he? He had Raina's phone number and an email signature. Until Friday night, the day before my wedding. Holt was telling me this in the lobby, and I was struggling to keep up, but he was patient. He said, "Last night, around 8 in the evening, your brother sent a text to 2 of his coworkers at Aramark. We have the text. We have it because one of those coworkers is a board observer of the Whitfield Series C and is required to report any unusual communications. Your brother said this, and I am quoting him because I memorized it on the drive over. He said, I just found out my pathetic sister loser Fiancé is actually one of the founders at Whitfield. Not the CEO, but a founder. Saw a LinkedIn photo. I have been making fun of this guy at family dinners for 2 years, and the joke is he is going to be a paper millionaire on Monday. I am going to make sure he knows who is signing his check on Monday. I'm going to make him sweat in the meeting. This is the best week of my life. Family is dead to me. Skipping the wedding tomorrow, because watching her marry him with my new information will make me laugh too hard. I stood there in the lobby of the hotel in my wedding dress, and I felt the air leave my lungs. Holt watched my face and waited. He said, Mrs. Whitfield, there are several things wrong with that text. The first is that your brother thinks Caleb is a co-founder, not the chief executive. He still does not know. The second is that your brother is describing a clear conflict of interest. He is a deal team member on a transaction in which the founder is his future brother-in-law. He never disclosed it. He should have disclosed it the second he found out. The third, and the reason we are here today, is that he sent that text from his Aramark work phone, which is monitored, and the compliance system flagged it within an hour. By midnight last night, Aramark's senior partners knew. By 6 in the morning today, our board knew. By 8 in the morning today, your brother sent another text, the one to your family. That one we also have, because compliance had already pulled the device data. By 9 in the morning today, the senior partner at Aramark, a man named Patrick Huang, who is a good and honorable man, called Caleb personally and asked what he wanted to do. I said, What did Caleb say? Holt smiled, just barely. He said, Caleb said 3 things. He said the wedding was going forward no matter what. He said he did not care what happened to your brother personally. And he said the deal would not close on Monday if your brother was still on the deal team, because he would not let a man who called his wife a desperate fool put his name anywhere near a closing document of his company. Holt let that sit for a second. He said, What we are doing today, in the hour after your wedding ceremony, is concluding 2 things. We are formally removing your brother from the deal team in person, with documentation, in front of Patrick. And we are signing the side letter that lets the deal close on Monday with new terms. Patrick is going to handle the firing portion in his role at Aramark separately, but we needed his physical presence here today to confirm certain points before Monday. None of this could wait because of the closing timeline. I am very sorry it had to be today. We tried every other option. There was none. I asked, "What about my brother? Why is he here? He has no idea, does he?" Holt shook his head. He said, "Your brother was called by Patrick an hour ago and told that there was an urgent on-site meeting with the founder of Whitfield Holdings to resolve a last-minute item before Monday closing, and that he needed to be there. We gave him the address. He thinks he is coming to a hotel conference room to sign papers and look important. He has no idea you are here. He has no idea Caleb is the founder. He has no idea, until he walks through those doors in about 90 seconds, that everything he has ever known about this deal and his life is about to change." I looked at Caleb. Caleb was watching me carefully, the way he always did when he had given me a lot of information and was waiting to see what I would do with it. I said, "You have been carrying this since last night." He said, "Since 1 a.m. when Holt called me. I did not want you to know any of this until after the ceremony. I wanted you to walk down that aisle for us, not because of him." I said, "You are a very good man, Caleb Whitfield." He said, "I love you, Sutton Mercer Whitfield." Then I turned to Holt and I said, "I want to be in the room." Holt blinked. He said, "Mrs. Whitfield, I am not sure that is wise." I said, "My brother told 47 members of my family this morning to skip my wedding because the man I love is a broke loser. I want to be in the room when he finds out what kind of broke loser he is. I will not say a word. I will stand against the wall. But I will be in the room." Caleb squeezed my hand. He looked at Holt and said, "She is in the room." Holt looked at me for a long second, and then he gave me that same small formal nod he had given me from the front of the ballroom. He said, "Mrs. Whitfield, follow me." The hotel had a small conference room off the lobby that Estella, who I am pretty sure should be running the country, had quietly reserved at Holt's request earlier that afternoon. It was a simple room. A long oval table, 8 chairs, a pitcher of water, a window that looked out on the parking lot. The Aramark team filed in first. Patrick Huang turned out to be a man in his early 50s, slim, with wire-rimmed glasses, and an expression that made it clear he had been a senior partner for a long time and had handled many uncomfortable conversations. He shook my hand with both of his and said, "Mrs. Whitfield, I am so sorry your wedding day is being used this way. I want you to know we did not have a choice on the timing. Caleb said yes to today because the alternative was worse for our deal and for your family, in that order. I promise you that what is about to happen is going to be handled professionally and quickly." I said, "Thank you." I told him I would stand against the wall and not speak. The woman with the leather portfolio, who Patrick introduced as Marisol Vega, the head of compliance at Aramark, sat down at the table. She had a thin folder in front of her. I could see, even from across the room, that the top page had my brother's name on it. Holt sat at the head of the table. Caleb sat next to him in his charcoal suit, my husband of approximately 12 minutes. I stood against the back wall, near the door, in my wedding gown, with my bouquet still in one hand because no one had remembered to take it from me. A second man from Aramark sat next to Marisol. His name was Devon. He was younger than my brother, maybe 31, and he was the board observer who had reported the original text the night before. I would not learn until later that he was the one who had also flagged Bryce's text to our family that morning, the second the compliance system caught it. Even though he had been off duty, he had done that because, in his words to Marisol when he called her at 7 a.m, that text crossed a line. Patrick stood by the window. He glanced at his watch. He said, "He is in the parking lot now." There was a knock at the door. Estella opened it. My brother walked in. I want to describe him exactly as he looked in that doorway. because I think the difference between Bryce at the start of that hour and Bryce at the end of it is one of the most important things that ever happened in my family. He walked in like he owned the building. Navy suit, white shirt open at the collar, sunglasses pushed up on his head, phone in his hand. He gave Patrick a short nod, then Holt a longer, more deferential one, because he assumed Holt was the founder. He did not look at Caleb. He did not look at me. He had not even glanced toward the back of the room. He said, "Patrick, Holt, sorry I am late. Traffic was a nightmare on Providence Road. Whatever last-minute thing this is, let us knock it out. I have got brunch reservations." Patrick said, "Sit down, Bryce." My brother sat. He set his phone face down on the table. He still had not looked at the back of the room. Patrick said, "Bryce, I want you to look around this room before we start. Take a moment. Make sure you understand who is here." My brother frowned. He looked at Patrick like he was being asked a strange question. Then he looked at Marisol, then Devon. He saw the folder with his name on it. Something flickered in his face. Then he looked at Holt, and the deferential nod faded, because Holt was looking at him with no warmth at all. Then he looked, for the first time, at the man sitting next to Holt. His eyes moved across Caleb's face. There was a half-second where nothing happened. Then his eyes widened. His mouth opened, just slightly. His head turned, very slowly, like a man trying not to believe what he was seeing, toward me, against the back wall, in my wedding dress. His face. I want to talk about his face. It is the face I will see when I am old. It went pale, and then red, and then pale again in about 4 seconds. His mouth moved, but no sound came out for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "What is this?" Caleb spoke for the first time. His voice was calm and even, and he did not get out of his chair. He said, "Bryce, I think you know my wife. I am Caleb Whitfield. The full name is James Caleb Whitfield. At work I am called Jay. At home I am called Caleb. I founded Whitfield Holdings in 2017. I am the chief executive officer and chairman of the board. I have been to your family dinners, and your father's birthday, and your sister fundraiser at the hospital, and you have called me a software guy and a broke loser and an embarrassment, and I never corrected you because I did not care what you thought of me, and I did not want my wife to find out from a Google search. She found out today. From a Wikipedia page. About 3 hours ago. My brother said nothing. Caleb said, "I am not the one who is going to fire you. Patrick is. He is going to fire you from Aramark because of the texts you sent in the last 24 hours. The first was to your coworkers last night, where you described a clear, undisclosed conflict of interest and stated your intention to abuse your position in a deal where your future brother-in-law was the founder. The second was to your family this morning, where you called my wife desperate and called her wedding a humiliation. Both texts were sent from your Aramark work device. Both texts were flagged by compliance. Holt and I have spent the morning informing the board of Whitfield Holdings of these communications. The Whitfield board has decided that the Series C will not close with your name on any of the closing documents, and that we require a written confirmation from Aramark that you have been removed from the deal team before the closing. Patrick is here to confirm that to us in person, and to handle your departure from Aramark separately." Patrick stepped forward. He said, "Bryce, you are terminated from Aramark Capital effective immediately. Your access has already been revoked. Marisol will walk you through the paperwork after this meeting. We will be quiet about this externally if you are quiet about it externally. You will not, however, be quiet inside your family about what you did, because I have already spoken with your father on the phone 20 minutes ago, and he is fully aware of the texts, including the one you sent to him personally last night at 1:15 in the morning, which Marisol will read into the record now for clarity." Marisol opened the folder. She read, in a flat professional voice, a text my brother had sent to my father at 1:15 in the morning, in which he had told my father that the deal would put him personally in line for a promotion to vice president by the end of the year, and that, as a side benefit, he was finally going to get to humiliate his sister loser fiancé in a closing room. He had also said, in that same text, that if my father wanted to send him the down payment for the lake house they had been discussing, he could get it back to him within 12 months from his bonus. I want you to understand. My father had read that text last night. My father had called me desperate this morning. My father had refused to come to my wedding. My father had known. My brother had finally looked at me. He looked at me with the expression of a man watching a building fall down. His eyes were wet. But I did not feel a single thing soften in me, because I had seen those eyes go wet 1,000 times before, always at the moment he got caught, never at the moment he had done the thing. He said, "Sutton." I held up one hand. I did not raise my voice. I said, "Bryce, today is my wedding day. I am not going to ruin the rest of it talking to you. Sign the papers. Walk out the front of this hotel. Do not come back to the ballroom. Do not call me tonight. Do not call me tomorrow. When you are ready to have an actual conversation, in maybe a year or two, you can write me a letter." I turned around. I walked out of the room. I did not slam the door. I just closed it behind me. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, and I let myself shake for about 30 seconds. Then I straightened my dress, picked up the train, and walked back down the hall toward my reception. The reception was already in motion by the time I got back to the ballroom. The band was warming up. Estella had instructed the staff to start passing appetizers and pouring champagne the second the ceremony ended, because the way to keep a wedding feeling like a celebration is to never let a silent moment last more than 90 seconds. People had not noticed that the bride and groom had stepped out for a meeting. They had just thought we had gone to take some private photos. Caleb caught up with me in the hallway outside the ballroom. He had loosened his collar one notch. He took both my hands. He said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I am better than okay. I am furious, and I am tired, and I am happy. All three at once." He said, "That meeting is over. Patrick and Marisol are handling the paperwork with Bryce now. He will be out of the hotel in 15 minutes. He will never come near you again. I promise." I said, "I believe you. Now let us go dance." We walked into the reception together. The room saw us, and they stood up, and they clapped, and the band kicked into the song Caleb and I had picked for our first dance, which was a slow, simple song he had played for me in the car on a long drive to Asheville one weekend, a song neither of us had heard before that drive, and both of us had loved by the end of it. We danced. I am not going to pretend my brain was fully in that dance, because half of it was still in the conference room, but the part of me that mattered, the part that had spent 400 Sundays of my life waiting to find a man like Caleb, that part was completely present. I held him close. He held me closer. The room watched, and then the song shifted, and other couples joined us on the floor. My grandmother danced with my mother. Marcine danced with her husband Theo, who had finally arrived from a work trip just in time for the reception. My great-aunt Phyllis danced with Tomas, who was 26 and had the patience of a saint. Caleb's mother Joan, a small bright woman with the kindest eyes, came over and held my face in both her hands and said, "You have made my son so happy. I have been waiting 20 years to meet you." I cried again, the 4th or 5th time that day, and I was starting to lose count. At some point in the middle of the second dance, my mother came up to me. She said, "Sutton, your father is in the parking lot." I stopped. She said, "He drove over. He is sitting in the car. He has been there for about an hour. He read your brother text from last night. The one that Marisol read. He read it on his phone. He has been calling me, but I have not been answering. He came here on his own. He is asking to come in. He is asking, not telling. That last part. He is asking, not telling." I do not think my father had ever asked for anything from anyone in his life. I looked at Caleb. Caleb said, "Your call." I looked at my grandmother, who had appeared at my elbow because she had a sense for these things. My grandmother said, "Sweetheart, you do not owe him a thing today. But if you want to talk to him, your aunt and I will come with you." I thought about it for maybe 30 seconds. Then I told my mother to go get him. My father walked into the lobby with his head down. He was wearing a suit he had owned for 15 years, the suit he had worn to my college graduation, the suit he had worn to my brother's first promotion. He was 67 years old that day, and he looked, for the first time in my life, like an old man. He stopped about 10 feet from me. He did not try to come closer. He said, "Sutton, I do not have a right to be at this wedding. I am not asking to come in. I am asking to say one thing." I nodded. He said, "I read what your brother sent me last night. I read it again this morning, after I had already called you that name, after I had already told your mother I was not coming. I read it again sitting in the car in this parking lot. And I realized, Sutton, that I have spent 34 years believing the wrong child. I have spent 34 years cheering for a son who was using me to get things and dismissing a daughter who was just trying to be loved by me. I do not have an excuse. I do not have an explanation. I am not going to ask you to forgive me today. I am just here to say it out loud, in front of your mother and your grandmother and your aunt and the man I called something I should never have called, that I was wrong about all of it. I will spend the rest of my life trying to understand what I did. Whether you let me near you again is up to you. I will not push." There was a long silence. My grandmother spoke first. She said, "Wendell, sit down in that chair. Sit down right now. You are not coming into this reception tonight. That is not happening. But you are going to sit in that chair, and you are going to write your daughter a letter. With a pen. On paper. Estella, do you have a pen and paper?" Estella, who I am pretty sure had heard every word of the last 2 minutes from her position behind a giant potted plant, produced a pen and a sheet of hotel stationery in under 5 seconds. My father sat down in the chair. He took the pen. He looked up at me. I said, "Dad, I am not going to read it tonight. I am going to put it in my purse, and I am going to read it next week. If it is honest, I will write you back. If it is not, you will not hear from me again until you write a better one." He nodded. He started writing. I looked at Caleb. Caleb held the door open for me, and we walked back into our reception, and we left my father in that lobby chair with a pen in his hand and 40 years of bad choices to put into words. For the next 4 hours, I did not think about my father or my brother or any of it. I ate the food I had paid for. I drank a glass of champagne with Priya and made her tell me again, in detail, what an idiot I was for never looking up Whitfield Holdings, and she made me laugh so hard I almost choked. I danced with Caleb work friends, who turned out to all be senior people at his company, including Raina Cho, the chief operating officer, who hugged me and said, "Thank God you exist. He has been the most unbearable, hopeless, lovesick man for 2 years now." I cut the cake with my husband, which is still the strangest word I have ever used in my life. My grandmother gave a toast. My mother gave a toast. Caleb's mother gave a toast. Each of them, in their own way, told me that I deserved this day, and that the people who had tried to take it from me had failed. At 11 o'clock that night, when the last song played and the lights came up and people started gathering their coats, my mother came up to me with a small white envelope in her hand. She said, "Your father gave me this before he left. He sat in that lobby for 2 hours writing it. He went home around 8. I have not read it. I told him I would not. I took it. I put it in the small silk clutch I had carried all day. I did not open it then. I would open it 3 days later on a Tuesday morning, sitting at the kitchen table of the house I now shared with my husband, with a cup of coffee and a quiet apartment around me. But that part comes later. Caleb and I had been planning to leave for our honeymoon in Maui the morning after the wedding. But in the conference room that afternoon, while my brother was being walked through his termination paperwork, Caleb had texted his assistant and pushed the honeymoon back by a week. He did not tell me at the time. He told me later that night, in the hotel room he had booked for our wedding night, when we were finally alone for the first time as husband and wife. He said, "I want us to be home for a few days first. There are conversations you are going to want to have with your family that I do not want you to have from a beach in Hawaii. I asked him if that was the only reason. He said no. He said the deal was closing on Monday, and even though Raina and Holt could handle the closing without him, he wanted to be physically in Charlotte that morning, in case anything came up. He apologized. He said he understood if I was angry. I was not angry. I had married a man who built things, and one of the things he had built was about to close a Series C funding round on Monday morning. And I wanted to be there in the kitchen, making him eggs while he sat at the table on a conference call. I told him that. I told him I wanted to be his wife in the actual texture of his life, and that meant Charlotte before Maui. He cried again. I had not realized, until that day, how much my husband had been holding in for 2 years. On Sunday morning, the day after the wedding, I woke up in our hotel room and I looked at my phone for the first time since the night before. I had 47 missed calls and over 100 text messages. The 47 calls were almost all from family members who had not come to the wedding. Each of them, in their own way, had been called by my grandmother, or by my mother, or by my Aunt Marcine over the course of Saturday afternoon and Saturday night, and they had been informed of what had actually happened. They had been told that Bryce had been fired. They had been told that the man they had been told was a broke loser had been on the front page of the business section of the Charlotte Observer in March of 2025, which several of them had not connected because they had not bothered to look at the picture. They had been told that my father had sat in a lobby chair writing me a letter while his daughter danced inside. Their voicemails were a study in human regret. Aunt Janelle, who had been the most vocal in the group chat about Bryce text, had left a voicemail in which she sobbed for 2 minutes and said she was so sorry. She had not known. She had believed her nephew. She had assumed her own niece had finally lost her mind, and she did not know how she would ever look me in the eye again. My Uncle Mac, who had been my father's best friend for 30 years and had taken his side on every disagreement in our family since 1995, had left a voicemail that said one sentence. He said, "Sutton, I owe you an apology that is bigger than a voicemail. Please let me come see you." I did not call any of them back that morning. I did not feel cruel about it. I just did not have it in me. I had a husband next to me, asleep with his face half in a pillow, and we were 1 day into a marriage we had fought to begin, and I was not going to spend our first morning on the phone with people who had not shown up. I did call my mother. She answered on the first ring. She had not slept much either. She said, "Your brother called me at 4 in the morning. He is at his apartment. He says he wants to come over." I told him no. I told him not until I had spoken to you. I told him not until I had read whatever your father wrote you. I told him a lot of things, Sutton. I told him things I should have told him 15 years ago. I asked her what she had told him. She said, I told him that he had broken something that he was not going to be able to fix with a phone call. I told him that he had not just hurt you, he had hurt our family in a way that was now permanent. I told him that I was not going to be the mother who held it all together by telling everyone to forgive and forget. I told him that he had a long road ahead of him if he wanted to be part of this family again, and that the first step was not going to be a conversation with me. It was going to be a conversation with his sister, and only when his sister decided she was ready, which might be never. I told her I loved her. She told me she loved me. We hung up. I want to tell you what happened with Bryce, because I know that is the question you are probably asking. He lost his job. He lost his apartment, because the apartment was tied to his salary and he had been living above his means anyway. He moved into a smaller place in a different neighborhood. He tried, in the first month, to text me 4 times. Each text was an attempt at an apology that contained more justification than apology. I did not respond. In August of 2025, almost 3 months after the wedding, my mother told me that Bryce had started seeing a therapist. She said he had been going twice a week. She said he had stopped drinking. She said he had not asked for money once, which she said was the first time in his adult life that he had gone 3 months without asking either of his parents for money. She said she did not know if it would last. She said she was not going to vouch for him to me. She said she just wanted me to have the information. After 2 weeks of reflection, I mailed a letter in late August. I explained that I would not resume contact with the brother until he worked on his character for personal growth, not to win me back. I offered a future meeting if he changed, and instructed him not to reply unless his words focused outside himself. He remained silent, showing the first real progress in 34 years. On the Tuesday following the wedding, I read a letter from the father. In tight handwriting, he confessed his childhood disappointment at my birth, admitted he treated me poorly because of his own upbringing, and apologized for the unequal college funds and his harsh words. He did not demand forgiveness, but asked for permission to improve. After hours of thought, I called him. The conversation lasted 4 hours. It was not a miraculous reconciliation, but a necessary beginning. Caleb welcomed the father into the residence, then stepped outside to allow us privacy. The father answered every question honestly, admitted past faults, and wept when confronted with his own indifference. He now visits weekly, assists with household repairs, and has begun building a genuine connection with Caleb and me. The mother ended the marriage in October of 2025, realizing she could no longer diminish herself. The father accepted the decision without protest. They sold the residence, and she now thrives in a small dwelling near the grandmother, pursuing hobbies and rediscovering her true self. I visit regularly, and I finally recognize the woman she was always meant to be. The grandmother turned 82 in September of 2025. She admitted she had waited decades for the separation, hoping to witness both of us become independent. She now looks forward to meeting a first great-grandchild. The company closed its funding round in June of 2025, reaching a valuation of $1.5 billion on paper. Caleb remains unchanged, still driving the same vehicle and valuing simple routines. I reduced hospital hours to launch a charity supporting single mothers in Eastern Oregon, honoring the mother of Caleb. We distributed initial grants in December, with the mother of Caleb attending the ceremony. I maintain no contact with Bryce. Reports indicate he works a modest job, attends therapy, and lives quietly. I remain uncertain whether this change reflects genuine growth or simple exhaustion, but I am content to wait. To anyone trapped in a lineage that diminishes you, remember this. The people who appear during your darkest moments form true family. The worth of a partner is never defined by the blindness of relatives. I walked down the wedding aisle in front of 51 guests, supported by the mother and the grandmother, to marry a man the brother refused to value. I arrived expecting loss, but discovered that those who vanished had never truly been present. The cruelty of the brother ultimately freed me to recognize real family. I do not believe the universe balances a ledger. I only know that those who construct their lives by degrading others eventually stand on nothing once victims depart. The brother now faces that empty space. I hope he rebuilds, though the labor belongs entirely to him. My work is the life I have. A husband who loves me, a mother who has come back to herself, a grandmother who whistled at my wedding, an aunt who told me the truth in a parking lot at Thanksgiving in 2023, a best friend who Googled my fiancé company in a bridal suite, a father who is trying, a career I love, a foundation I am proud of, a house with a garden and a dog and a porch where I drink coffee in the morning and watch the sun come up over a city that I have lived in my whole life and that finally feels like mine. If you are still here with me, thank you. Thank you for spending this hour of your day listening to my story. If any part of it touched you or reminded you of something in your own life, I would love it if you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so I can keep telling stories like this one. And more than anything, I would love it if you shared your own story in the comments. Tell me about the family member who tried to make you small. Tell me about the people who showed up when others did not. Tell me about the moment you realized your worth was not theirs to decide. I read every comment, and your stories are the reason I keep telling mine. My name is Sutton Mercer Whitfield. I am 34 years old. I am a wife, a nurse, a daughter, a granddaughter, and a woman who finally chose herself. I hope, wherever you are watching from, you choose yourself too.